Being trans is not identifying with the gender you were assigned to at birth. Gender dysphoria is an intense discomfort toward the gender you were assigned to at birth in physical and social aspects. I believe there's been a huge disservice done to the many people who believe and buy into the idea of there being more than two genders. Because last I checked, biology is a form of science, and some of the methods we use to determine if something is scientific or not is observation, experimentation, and the ability to repeat our findings. Through pure observation, there are only two genders. Through all forms of experimentation, we've only discovered two genders. This includes intersex, other forms of people with ambiguous genitalia, as well as other genetic defects, and typical gender representation. From a scientific standpoint, there are only two genders. The problem is people are conflating science with social norms and the societal representations of them. This does not change your sex. This does not change your gender. This only shows how both male and female operate between a spectrum of masculine and feminine, and what is considered masculine and feminine depending on the society you either were raised in or live in. For instance, wearing a skirt and makeup does not make you a girl. Top surgery and bottom surgery will not change your gender. The way you dress will not make you the opposite sex, and unfortunately for some of you, no matter what you're feeling, it won't change your gender. Delusion, an idiosyncratic belief or impression that is firmly maintained despite being contradicted by what is generally accepted as reality or rational argument, typically a symptom of mental disorder. If I can prove to you scientifically that what you're experiencing isn't based in reality, then you're deluded. In order to do this, I would have to use observation, experimentation, and be able to repeat my findings. It is a fact that only females experience menstrual cycles. This does not mean that all women will, but it does mean that only women can. Also, when it comes to us humans, only men produce sperm. This does not mean that all men will, but it does mean that only men can. If there are any medical cases where a woman produces sperm or a man menstruates, these are extremely rare medical anomalies. They're not supposed to be able to do that, and something is really wrong with them. The basic definition of a man is an adult male. For a boy is a male child. For a woman is an adult female. For a girl is a female child. I've listened to many arguments on this subject. One of the weakest I've heard is the argument for the third sex. So first, I would like to counter with the most obvious argument. That is, they count only three sexes: male, female, and whatever the third sex is. This is not an infinite spectrum. Second, most of the people groups that adopt this practice don't hold the third gender in high regard, and most of them only allow the males to express as a third gender. Calling a male who is not expressing himself as a member of the third gender is typically considered an insult. And if two males were to have sex and neither are members of the third gender, they would be shunned or even killed. At the very least, their actions would be frowned upon. These are not the champions of the queer community that we're led to believe they are. These people groups are not the ideal representations of the gay liberation movement that they themselves claim are the forefathers. But most of them are part of a society that allows a fringe group of what the rest of them would have seen as either a sexual deviance or an outlier in their society that allows some men to be viewed as a secondary sex option. And because these minority groups earn their keep, later some would be celebrated, even grafted as gods in their pantheon. But this is not the modern understanding of the LGBTQ+IA. And in most aspects of their society, by today's standards, they would be considered bigoted or oppressive. Right now I'm painting with a pretty broad brush. This was just an overview of many different third gender expressions from around the world. I haven't focused on any one in particular. I am only focusing on the similarities between them all. With that being said, this is a fairly nuanced conversation with many different types of gender expressions. Some are more complicated, most are not. It's pretty fair to say that most of the third gender expressions around the world are men presenting as women with the occupation of prostitute or nanny. One of the more nuanced so-called third gender expressions is that of the eunuch. From what I've seen, it's typically a heterosexual man who was castrated because he was not trusted by the patriarchs to not have sex with their women, or a male slave that eventually turns to prostitution. It was also a punishment, one of the worst ways to torture a man, and because of the obvious, it was rarely requested. The only reason I can find for eunuchs to be held in any esteem is because of their position to royalty. Let's just say there's a reason why this isn't a popular practice today.